Hello everybody, my name is Brianna Bilo and I'm a meteorologist here with the National Weather Service office in Grand Junction, Colorado, and this is your October 2025 monthly weather summary. I apologize for the lateness of this and the posting of the September summary. Unfortunately, when the government is shut down, we are basically stripped down to performing only mission critical tasks, and as much as we all love these summaries, they're not really mission critical. Y'all can get on with your daily lives without having them. So now that the government is reopened, I can continue. I've already posted the September summary and all of everything that goes along with it, so you can go ahead and check that out. And the October summary is up right now. And hopefully going forward, barring anything else unforeseen, these will be filmed and posted on time back to our normal schedule that you have all gotten used to. I apologize for all of the hiccups and the delays this year. It's definitely been an interesting one. So with that out of the way, let's move into the summary. So for our story of the month, we have the Southwest Colorado flooding. I'm sure most of you are aware of this insanely unusual event that we had in the middle of October, where we had not one but two tropical storm remnants come up into the Four Corners region and particularly slam into the southern San Juan mountains, which with southerly direction of a system moving in acts sort of like I've had a former colleague refer to it as like kind of like a catcher's mitt. Basically it catches all of that moisture and it forces it to turn into precipitation. And in fact that is the area where we saw some of our highest precipitation totals, where we saw totals of 5 to 6 inches in several areas. There were places along the divide, particularly they were over on Pueblo's side, but that saw 7 inches of rain. And further to the north and in lower elevations here in Grand Junction, we saw a little over 2 inches out of the storm. There's some places that saw kind of 2 to 3. Further to the north, they got maybe a half inch to an inch. So really these southern areas of the Grand Junction County warning area were the areas that got hit the hardest, just because of that combination of terrain and the direction that these storms were coming from and the unusual amount of moisture associated with them, because these were tropical storm remnants and so they were very juicy. The area above Pagosa Springs particularly really got slammed with this moisture. We started receiving information about flooding in the Vallecito area Friday into Saturday, and we started receiving information of areas south of Pagosa Springs in the Rio Blanco area, which confused me, I admit, because there's a lot of Rio Blancos in the region. And then we also started actually seeing some significant flooding in Pagosa Springs proper. And so that brings us to kind of our images, where this image here on the right of your screen is just rain totals for a 36-hour or so period. And you can see some of these pretty impressive totals where Wolf Creek Pass got over 6 inches, Luminuche got 5.6, Vallecito got over 5, Middle Creek got over 5, Stump Lakes got 5, and going on. So our lower elevations, Durango Airport, Bayfield, they got 2, 2.5. So definitely those were the highest totals we saw out of this storm. And then Pagosa Springs, we saw a very minor little increase in water levels to start. And a tiny little dip, and then the afternoon of Saturday the 12th, we saw the river level go from well below our action stage to above major flood stage. It topped out at between 12.6 and 12.7 feet. We started receiving reports of flooding across roadways and into the lower levels of some buildings, of evacuations in the Pagosa Springs area. And we did actually reach moderate flooding with the second push of moisture from the second tropical storm. So the first one was Priscilla, then it was followed a day or so later by Raymond. And we did see it pop back up over moderate flood stage before finally coming back down as things started to dry out and this moisture kind of ran its course. But like, this was just truly a historic event. in the sense that while it has happened in the record, it happens rarely. A lot of people began comparing this event to the floods of, I want to say it was 1911, which was also from a tropical entity. And the last time Vallecito saw any sort of flooding like this was back in 1970. So definitely, while this is an event that happens periodically, it is something along the lines of a once-in-a-generation type event, maybe even once every 50 to 100 years type of event. So definitely a rarity. And the other thing to consider too is that a lot of these areas, when they last saw flooding, which would have been back in the 70s, they've become significantly more built up over time. So we've seen an increase in impacts, even though this type of thing does periodically happen. So just a combination of a lot of factors that led to this particularly interesting, particularly damaging event. And it was definitely, I had the privilege or unfortunate task of working this afternoon, and it was definitely an interesting moment. I'm glad that for the most part everybody was safe, and the vast majority of problems that came out of this event was property damage, because this could have been a significantly worse event, and I was glad that I got to help keep people safe. So that's our story of the month, and we'll move into some of the actual data from the month of October. So these are our highest highs during the month. The highest high we saw anywhere out of our 10 sites was 89 in Canyonlands on the 3rd, while the highest high was 75 in Aspen, again on the 3rd. All of these occurred on the 3rd. We had one last particularly brutal warm snap at the beginning of the month before we finally started seeing fall transition towards winter, and we cooled and cooled and cooled through the month as systems moved through. And our coldest temperatures of the month all occurred at the end of the month. Not that surprising, you would expect that. Our warmest, coolest low was again in Canyonlands on the 29th and the 30th, where they dropped to 32 degrees. And our coldest low was 15 in Aspen on the 28th and the 29th. So we actually saw a dry period after that, the rain-producing storm in the middle of the month, and then we had a potent little system move through at the very end of the month with a very strong cold front and a good strong cold air mass behind it, on top of clear skies and good radiational cooling conditions that allowed the bottom to drop out across the area, and so we started to see these pretty chilly temperatures. Moving into precipitation, predominantly good news. I don't think anyone will be surprised considering how much moisture we got in the middle of the month from those two tropical storms. So the big winner for the month was unsurprisingly Durango, and I suspect Pagosa Springs might have eked them out, but because Pagosa Springs is not considered one of our 10 climate sites, it's not included in here. But you can go and look up some of our rain totals from different areas, different reporting sites that are not necessarily climate sites, but still are reliable sources of information, and you can get totals from those areas. But yes, so Durango got just over 4¼ inches out of the month of October, which is almost 3 inches above normal. And then Vernal is again at the bottom, but I don't think anyone can complain when they got just under an inch of precipitation, which is more than they've seen in the last 10 months. And this was only 1/1300th of an inch below normal, so pretty close. Aspen also didn't do too well out of this event. The Central Mountains kind of got skunked, mostly because by the time this moisture reached the Central Mountains out of that big tropical event, it had pretty much been wrung out, and there just wasn't a lot left over. So they still did relatively well. They got close to normal, also being only 1/1300ths below normal. But compared to places like Durango and Meeker and even Grand Junction, Aspen kind of got the short end here. But we are moving into what could potentially be a La Nina winter. There is a weak La Nina developing in the Pacific, and that tends to favor our mountain towns, particularly our northern and central mountains, so Aspen may be able to make up for this. We'll see. Speaking of our more long-term climate things, we have our drought update, and unsurprisingly, with all of the moisture that we got out of that mid-month system, we really took a lot of drought out of the map. We've completely eradicated any remnants of D4. We've almost completely eradicated D3 extreme drought. Really the only areas that still have that are some portions of far northeast Utah, far northwest Colorado, a little pocket along the Colorado border, or not the Colorado border, the Colorado River rather, where just that moisture just didn't quite stream. The moisture plume was kind of more over here rather than over here. And the Central Mountains, which, as I spoke before, kind of got skunked because all of this moisture hit several mountain ranges before hitting this region. Aside from that, we've completely gotten rid of all of the D3 that existed throughout all of central western Colorado and central eastern Utah. In some places, we've completely gotten rid of drought completely. Unsurprisingly, the area where we saw the most moisture, the southern San Juans and some of our southwest Colorado valleys, completely drought-free now. Large swath of abnormally dry conditions, again related to that significant moisture, and then we kind of fill in with moderate to severe drought patches for the rest of the area. So definitely quite the improvement. That was a drought buster kind of event. Now the problem becomes we need to kind of keep up with that moisture, because if we see a dry rest of the winter, this drought will just kind of creep back in. So we'll have to wait and see. As far as the outlook for the drought, all these areas that have now become drought-free or abnormally dry are expected to remain as such. And the areas where drought still exists, drought is expected to continue to exist. So not really any major changes in one direction or the other. The Climate Prediction Center is not expecting drought to redevelop in areas where drought has been removed, nor is it expecting drought to be removed in areas where drought persists. Kind of status quo in that respect. But we do have the return of the snowpack update, since we have finally reached that time of the year and we are finally starting to see some snow accumulate in the mountains. Eastern Utah is definitely doing better, with the northeastern Uinta Basin at 140 to 150% of normal for the time of the year, and the Duchesne Basin at almost 130% of normal. Southeast Utah kind of struggling. That's not surprising, as the actual ranges in the southeastern Utah Basin are kind of confined to the La Salles and the Abajos. So it'll take a little bit of time for these guys to kind of join into the picture, but we might see some of that develop before we move into December, as we are moving into a stormy period as I am recording this in mid to late November. Looking at Colorado, we do have a snowpack, but none of it is particularly exciting. The northern mountains are doing the best, which is pretty typical of a La Nina year, but again, there's a lot of variables that kind of go into whether or not we'll see snow that exist both on a longer term than the La Nina and on a shorter term than the La Nina. So it really depends on, like, La Nina is easy to predict and it's consistent, and so we use that a lot to kind of start to get an idea of how our season is going to go, but there's a lot more complicated things involved there. So typically in a La Nina year, we see the northern mountains do better than the southern mountains, and at least in terms of this one particular image, that is what we see, with the Yampa White and Little Snake Basin at 40 to 50% of normal, followed by the Colorado headwaters at 30 to 40% of normal, and then the Gunnison and San Miguel, Dolores, Animas, San Juan basins at 20 to 30% of normal. Again, there are other variables involved. Right now, we are moving into a phase of what is known as the Madden-Julian Oscillation, which is it's an area of storminess that follows a predictable pattern on what is known as a subseasonal scale. So we're talking a month or two, like a couple weeks to a couple of months kind of scale. So it's a shorter time scale than the La Nina, and therefore it's harder to predict months in advance the way that ENSO, El Nino, and La Nina can be. So that actually has a pretty significant impact on what happens with our snowpack and our storms here in eastern Utah and western Colorado when the Madden-Julian Oscillation is in certain phases, and we're moving into one of those periods right now. We can actually see a fairly wet period, particularly focused on our southern mountains and our central mountains. And with this previous storm that we've seen as I am recording this, that definitely kind of followed suit. These areas saw the best moisture out of this system, and then lesser moisture as you moved further north. So definitely something to bear watching. And then as for our November 2025 outlook, the Climate Prediction Center is really kind of leaning into that La Nina type pattern where they are favoring us for above normal temperatures. This is, I believe, a 40 to 50% tendency, so a relatively strong signal, but not like you are definitely going to see above normal temperatures, so there's a little bit of wiggle room there. And then they have a slight tendency towards below normal precipitation, with the southern half of the area slightly more favored at 30 to 40% tendency towards it, with the 40 to 50% down here, and then 33 to 40% up further north. So the signal is there, but it is a fairly weak signal. Again, that kind of leaves us with a lot of wiggle room to see better precipitation, closer to normal precipitation, because again, with these types of things, this just tells you whether or not there is a signal. It doesn't tell you the magnitude. Okay, so just because this is showing a 50 to 60% tendency towards above normal precipitation doesn't mean we're going to be significantly above normal the whole month. If we remain just a single degree above normal for the whole month, then this verifies and the signal was correct. So even if we get close to normal, within, I don't know, a tenth of an inch to normal precipitation, that still verifies as below normal. So these kind of just give you an idea of what the tendency is, not necessarily the magnitude of it. So definitely keep your eyes peeled and pay close attention to the forecasts, especially as we're moving into holiday travel season with, Thanksgiving, a week and a half away. So keep a close eye on the forecast. Use this as additional information to inform your plans, but not necessarily as the be-all, end-all of the rest of the season. And enjoy the rest of your month, and I'll see you again in early December. That one should, barring anything unforeseen, actually come out pretty quick early in the month, because I will be taking a much needed vacation. So keep your eyes peeled for that, and we should also be having a seasonal summary as well for the fall season, so that is September, October, November. So stay tuned, stay informed, and have fun. Enjoy. Thanks for watching.